Synesthesia, a colorful summary. Our presentation overview. First of all, what exactly is synesthesia? What is its research value? Its implications on behavior and perception? And how is it like inside a synesthete's brain? What are the competing theories? And last of all, we'll round up with some concluding remarks. Words can have taste. Mondays can be blue. Names taste like something. And numbers have personality too. All these quotes are not metaphorical, but matter-of-fact statements made by people with synesthesia. What in the world is this strange condition? The word synesthesia comes from ancient Greek. It means a union of sensations. And synesthete is the term for a person with such a condition. Synesthesia is a phenomenon in which the stimulation of a sense can activate other senses. Every sense can theoretically be coupled with any other sense. Synesthesia is much more common than you think. 1 out of 23 individuals in the general population appears to have at least one type of synesthesia. The most common type is grapheme to color synesthesia. 1 in 90 has it. I shall elaborate on this later on. Colored graphemes. Graphemes are words of units or numerical digits. It is the most common type of synesthesia. People with grapheme synesthesia will perceive colors when reading, hearing, or imagining words or numbers. Synesthetes who associate letters and numbers with colors can be differentiated into two groups. The more common type is called associators. For them, they see the colors of letters with their mind's eye. For the other group known as projectors, the synesthetic color can feel the printed letter, or it can appear directly in front of their eyes, as if projected onto an invisible screen. Which is Kiki and which is Booba? I guess you have named the angular figure Kiki, which has a sharper sound. The fact that most people will match a sharper sound to a sharper figure suggests that the ability to tie different senses to each other exists within every person. For some, namely synesthetes, this ability appears to be much more pronounced. I hope I've left you with this understanding that the basis of synesthesia may not be so out of the world after all. Sherry will now take over to talk about synesthesia's research value.
This phenomenon of synesthesia is an interesting and important area of research because of its wider implications in furthering our knowledge of how the brain works, and also because it informs us about the nature and nurture dichotomy. A study by Burnett et al. Found that although there are different types of synesthesia and differences in the way people experience their synesthesia, the occurrence of synesthesia was largely genetic or hereditary, while the experience of synesthesia had a largely environmental or nurture component. Synesthetes were far more likely to have a first-degree relative who also had synesthesia as compared to a non-synesthete. The effects of nurture, such as practice effects, show that while some synesthetes are able to process mathematical equations faster, practice can influence this processing speed. Another important issue that synesthesia is possibly related to is that of the binding problem. If we recall in an earlier lecture, the binding problem arises because a mechanism in which the brain integrates information from the different modalities into a single construct has yet to be discovered. In other words, how does the brain connect the sound of barking to a particular dog? Synesthetes and their ability to perceive two usually unrelated stimuli as one and the same, especially across modalities, are particularly interesting to those who study the binding problem. How does the synesthete's brain connect touch and taste, or vision and taste? How does the brain give rise to the perception of bitter winds? Besides providing us insight as to how such literary expressions arise, the synesthete's brain structure could have a different mechanism as compared to non-synesthetes, one that led to a more pronounced integration across modalities and features. While direct links between synesthesia and sensory integration have yet to be found, this is definitely an area of research that is of interest. While these questions may be interesting on a global scientific scale, they are usually not that interesting to the average synesthete. What does synesthesia mean for a synesthete, behavior-wise? Several differences between synesthetes and non-synesthetes have been documented. Firstly, color synesthetes have superior visual spatial ability, which enables them to process sequences such as numbers and historical dates, as well as pinpoint precise locations in spatially extended patterns better than their non-synesthetic counterparts. A study by Gross et al. Also found that synesthetes had an advantage in visual, spatial, and verbal recall tasks, as their enhanced encoding of colored graphemes function as a cue in memory recall. Next, Yuting will talk about the impact of synesthesia on perception.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm Yuting, and I will go on to discuss further about the behavioral implications of synesthesia. Firstly, I would like to elaborate on the grapheme color pairing synesthesia. In grapheme color pairing synesthesia, an individual's perception of number and letter is associated with the experience of colors. In one form, synesthetes associate low-frequency letters, such as Q, with low-frequency color terms, such as purple. Based on a study by Bridgman, synesthetic color is elicited by identity of character rather than physical form. As shown in Figure 1, the upright A and the inverted A have the same physical form, meaning the geometry of the figure features remain the same regardless of orientation, even though the letter A in different orientations have different identity. When a character is rotated, the synesthetic perceives different color, even though physical form remains unchanged. Hence, this suggests that synesthetic color could be elicited by character identity. Studies have shown that there is a relationship between modality of synesthetic experience and modality of sensory enhancement. This means that synesthetes who experience color or touch have enhanced color or tactile sensitivity respectively. This finding suggests the possibility that a hypersensitive concurrent perceptual system is a general property of synesthesia. Studies have also shown that in the case of grapheme color synesthetes, attention is not necessary for binding of colors to grapheme. This suggests that synesthesia has an involuntary neural mechanism. A study by Nunn has identified area V4 as one possible region involved in synesthetic experience. Interestingly, they found out that it is not possible to cause activation in area V4 after overtraining non-synesthetes on word color associations. This suggests that there are some key neural mechanisms for synesthesia which is absent in non-synesthetes. To help you better understand the neural mechanisms, I will pass on to Kenny, who will elaborate more on it.
Thank you, Yuting. Having seen how synesthetes display different behaviors from non-synesthetes, as students interested in learning more about the mechanisms of the brain, we ask the next question about which regions of the brain are activated when synesthetes view certain letter stimuli as another modality, such as color. You may expect that because synesthetes see certain letters in certain colors, as what we have demonstrated earlier, that the primary and secondary visual cortex V1 and V2 will be activated due to the perception of color when viewing the letters. In color hearing synesthetes, no activity in the primary visual cortex was captured by fMRI when participants reported color experiences when they hear spoken words. This could suggest that the primary visual cortex was not necessary for synesthetic experience. However, the area V4 located near the fusiform gyrus was activated in synesthetes, but not in non-synesthetes. We know that V4 contributes to visual attention rather than the perception of color itself. In grapheme color synesthesia, it was found that both areas V4 and the superior parietal lobe were activated. In addition, using magnetoencephalography, the posterior temporal lobe was found to exceed baseline levels during the synesthetic experience and was activated almost simultaneously with areas V4. The superior parietal lobe and the posterior temporal lobe are regions that have been known to process graphemes in the brain. This almost simultaneous activation of the grapheme processing regions and V4 could suggest that a strong connection between these two areas in synesthesia. Although these studies have shown that different regions of the brain are activated during synesthesia, they have not examined how the various regions of the brain are interconnected with each other. We know that brain regions communicate with each other through white matter, consisting of axon connections. Using MRI on participants with and without synesthesia, Hangi and colleagues found that there is more global connectivity in synesthete's brain. In particular, Rowe and Sko have found that synesthetes had increased white matter in the temporal areas near the fusiform gyrus, the parietal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex. In the diagrams, synesthetes had a higher local tract structure than non-synesthetes in the areas that are colored yellow. After seeing how the brain is activated during synesthesia, the question of how this activation of the brain areas relate to the synesthetic experience itself arises. There are two theories offering some explanation of how the brain functions to produce the experience of another modality despite not being exposed to it. Firstly, the cross-activation theory posits there's a hyperconnectivity between areas V4 and the grapheme processing areas, namely the PTL and the SPL. As seen earlier, when synesthetes view certain graphemes, not only do their grapheme processing areas activate, but the color selective region V4 was activated as well. This could have resulted in the experience where the synesthete perceives a color when exposed to a grapheme. The theory proposes that the hyperconnectivity occurred because of a decreased axonal pruning during development, leaving more axons available in synesthetes. In the second theory, namely the disinhibited feedback theory, posits that there's normal connectivity patterns in synesthetes, and synesthesia occurs because of the disinhibition of the normally inhibited feedback connections from the higher level cortical areas, which are the temporal and parietal cortex, towards the V4. In other words, graphemes are processed in the temporal cortex first, before sending feedback towards the area V4 for activation of color. This way, synesthetes are able to perceive color in certain graphemes due to the lack of inhibition of the connections from the higher cortical areas projected onto V4. As previous research demonstrated that brain regions V4, temporal and parietal areas are activated during synesthesia, the main difference between the two contrasting theories is the sequence of events running through the brain that ultimately resulted in synesthesia. For the cross-activation theory, both V4 and grapheme processing areas are hypothesized to be activated simultaneously due to the hyperconnectivity between the regions. The disinhibited feedback theory hypothesized that grapheme processing areas should be activated before color-associated V4 regions are activated. Evidence has been cited against the disinhibited feedback theory that V4 and posterior temporal grapheme processing areas exceeded baseline levels with an insignificant 5 milliseconds head start for the posterior temporal grapheme. However, recent research by Van Leeuwen and colleagues showed that potential reconciliation between the two theories. As we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there are two different groups of synesthetes. The first group consisted of projectors who experience color externally with a presented grapheme. The second group consisted of associators who report an internally evoked association but do not externally perceive the colors. The study found that a bottom-up explanation suited projectors better, whereby both areas V4 and the grapheme processing areas are activated simultaneously, and a top-down explanation suited associators more due to the activation of the grapheme processing areas first. It could be possible that because V4 receives information first-hand from the fusiform gyrus, according to the cross-activation theory, projectors are able to externally perceive the color of the grapheme. On the other hand, because V4 receives less detailed information from the grapheme processing areas due to the disinhibited feedback theory, color is not perceived externally by the associators. In our presentation, we have given a brief introduction to the various kinds of synesthesia, highlighting its research value into shedding light on how the brain works, and also how it will contribute to the larger philosophical question of human consciousness. We have also given you a quick tour into the synesthete's brain and introduced two competing theories. Although synesthesia is a relatively new field with more questions than answers, we have condensed the current findings of synesthesia into this video for you. We hope that you have enjoyed yourself, and thank you for your time.